Just a little background on myself. I'm the Dorchester County Forester, and I'm also the Midshore project manager. A little bit of background on myself. I spent 22 years in private industry as a procurement forester with Johnson Lumber Company in Easton, Maryland. We predominantly dealt in hardwood management. Our specialty was managing hardwood timber for wildlife, as well as feeding the mill. We're going to talk today, most of what I'm going to talk about today is going to be based on what you see around you. And I want everybody to look. This is a mature loblolly pine forest. And I'm going to talk a little bit about loblolly pine management, early successional forest, and how that ties in with wildlife management. I'm also going to talk a little bit about some programs that are available through NRCS and the Maryland Department of Natural Resources for tree plantings, reforestation, and afforestation. I'll try and be brief with this because I could go on for hours, but I only got a couple minutes, so I'll try and be brief. A little background on this. This forest is estimated at about 80 years old. It's reaching the end of its life cycle. And for any of you who've ever rode down the road and you look over and you see a clear cut, you're just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're destroying it. No, loblolly pine is a shade intolerant species. It's also known as a pioneer species. It needs full sunlight to regenerate. So when you see a pine forest like this clear cut, it's done for a specific silvicultural application. So there are reasons why we manage in a specific way. Now, some jobs look better than others, absolutely. But there is a science behind that type of management. Generally on this type of forest, what you do is you're going to manage it, you come in, you clear cut it, and allow for natural regeneration. This loblolly pine is extremely prolific in seed production and pine cone production, so generally there's a lot of seed on site and it'll regenerate naturally. When you regenerate a stand, you get several different types of wildlife benefits. For anybody that's a deer hunter, you get what's called a thermal bedding pocket. This functions as a windbreak, and the deer use it in the winter to keep warm, and they actually use it in the summer to stay cool because it keeps the sun off of them. You also get, in the early successional stages, there's several species of bird that thrive in a disturbed environment. So you have benefits in wildlife there as well. Unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot of hardwood here to talk about on management. This is a predominantly loblolly pine forest. And I don't know, as you guys were coming in, and right when you came through the covered bridge and you looked over to your right-hand side, did anybody see the young pine that was coming up? Okay, that stand was harvested in about 2012. It was harvested utilizing a clear-cut method, and the regeneration you see there is natural regeneration. So that big, heavy, thick pine that came in, that was all from seed that was on site. And the reason that harvest took place was we had something here called southern pine beetle. Has anybody heard of that before? Okay, I'm going to tie this back to why I mentioned the age of the forest. Loblolly pine is a relative, I don't want to say short-lived species, but its lifespan is about 80 to 110 years. So this being in an 80-year-old stand, it's towards the end of its lifespan. And what happens is as trees get older, they lose vigor. When they lose vigor, they're more vulnerable to insect and disease attacks, and which is what happened in the stand that was harvested. As the tree loses vigor, it's unable to fend off the insect attack. So in a healthy forest with lots of vigor, when southern pine beetle bores into the tree responds by flooding the wound with sap called pitch. So it actually pitches the insect out of the wound, thus creating it from becoming established within the stem. As the tree gets older, it loses vigor. It can't do that. And then you get beetle into the tree and it starts girdling the tree essentially. And after enough damage, the tree dies. So to sanitize that, the best way to sanitize it is to cut it down and get rid of it. And then if you have an infestation in one area, you have to go a certain distance out from where that infestation is to stop it from spreading. Well, loblolly pine has many uses. They saw it for lumber. They saw it for timbers, beams. They use the chips for paper. They use
pilings, fence posts,
shavings for poultry litter, and wood stove pellets. They also use it for, yeah, so it's got a lot of uses, and the uses depend on the size of the tree at the time of harvest. So what I'd like to do now is take you through a typical loblolly pine rotation and management schedule. So we're going to do a mental exercise here, and I'm just going to talk about how we would manage this forest from this mature forest. We harvest it in a clear-cut manner because we need even age. We come back 3 years later, check for regeneration. If we don't have adequate regeneration, we figure out how much regeneration is there and what density to plant at, because you want to be about 600 trees per acre to get height on it. If you have too many trees per acre, you may want to come in and do what's called a pre-commercial thinning to release the better stems that are on site. Basically, you just let it grow for about 17 to 20 years, and then you assess the stand for what's called a commercial thinning operation. Under a commercial thinning operation, you're going to want to come in and you're going to want to release what are called your crop trees. So you intentionally have an overstocked stand that you plan on reducing the basal area and stem count at a certain age in its lifetime. Generally, we look at, on pine management, we look at about 20 years to consider thinning. And when we do thinning, it does have value to it. Now, out of the stems harvested, we get, they either go for chips for paper, to Pixel, which is in Delmar, and they produce extremely high quality, like magazine paper, that high gloss, high end paper, or Eastern Shore also does chips. They had a contract with the ECI prison for their wood-fired boiler system, and when the gas lines came through, the state of Maryland wanted to retrofit the boilers to natural gas, so they lost that market. But they're also using the pine for, as John stated, fence posts, shavings for poultry litter, and they're also using it to make wood stove pellets. So those are just some of the byproducts, or some of the products that are made out of pine thinning. Okay, so after you thin it, you want to take it down to about 70 square feet of basal area and about 300 trees per acre, and you want to let that grow. You want to let grow another 10 to 12 years and assess it again for what's called a second thinning. And in this operation, you're going to get small diameter saw logs, and you're going to take out the weakest of the residual stand. And your end goal is to get down to about 100 to 120 trees per acre. And then you want to grow that until you get considering harvest at 50 to 60 years. And that should give you a yield of 250 board foot per tree at 100 trees per acre. That'll give you 25,000 foot per acre harvest. So that's loblolly pine management in a nutshell.
I hope you guys will keep good records, because you've already talked to several people's careers. Of course, and you haven't even gotten to the end zone yet.
Well, I inherited an office that has extensive records. In fact, I don't know if any of you guys know Jim Clunk, who worked for the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. He retired and then went into consulting. And he called me up asking me for Scott Daniels' number. I took Scott Daniels' job. I didn't take it. He retired, so I applied for it, and they hired me. He says, I heard you were down there. I started in that office in 1964. And I'm pretty sure his records are in the file cabinet. So, but I've spent 22 years doing pine and hardwood management. My specialty is hardwood management, but I've had to do this for landowners as well. And I've talked about timber management, but I'm going to talk a little bit about how we utilize this for wildlife management, especially with hunting. You know, a lot of times we get phone calls from hunters that say, well, my woods just isn't thick enough. I'm not holding deer. What can I do? And, you know, we'd have to go in and assess the stand. And if there was an area where we could establish a pine management unit, 15 or so acres, 20 acres, where it could be a viable management unit in the future, we recommend and say, well, hey, why don't you put in a patch clear cut and do it in a way that you'll have travel corridors between your fields and other areas in the woodlands, so that way you can access it on any wind. You'll have your bedding pocket, you'll be holding deer, and then we'll go in and do timber stand improvement in the rest of the woods, where we'd harvest some mature timber, but we'd also release the crop trees around like your white oaks. In terms of hardwood management, you know, for those of you that have hardwood forests, you want to release your white oaks. So we come in and we take out the sweet gum. Where are the duck guys? I've actually managed for sweet gum. I've been in woods where that's what's growing there. You're not going to change it. So I had a professor. Well, I met a forester in the Monongahela National Forest once, and he said, y'all young guys need to learn something. Don't try and grow something where it won't grow, and if something's growing there really good, manage for it.
So one of the things I want to point out to you, so my name is John Hooven. I'm the Forest Stewardship Educator and Master Logger Program Coordinator for University of Maryland Extension. Prior to me doing the job that I do here today, I was County Forester for Maryland Forest Service down in Somerset County. One of the things that I see here when I look at this forest, what's everybody's perception here? Is this a good forest? Is this a nice looking forest to everybody? So, say again?
Not for wildlife, I don't think.
Good. Yeah, I agree with you, because part of the problem here is, as we're looking through at the understory, first off, it's rather a little bit dark and kind of dense. And what you don't see, though, is you don't see anything in the way of any understory. And that's the thing. You really want to get some understory going in here, because that's places where nooks and crannies, the wildlife can hide. So one of the things that I would be looking at if I'm managing this property for wildlife, strictly for wildlife, is I want to get some sunlight down to the floor, so that way open it up, let some of this greenbrier creep in. Also, another thing you want to look at is this was basically managed for the pine out here. That's across the eastern shore. That's pretty commonplace. And in the process of doing that, what a lot of landowners would do is manage the plantations and basically come in and they would clear cut, allow the pine and the sweet gum to come in, but they would do an aerial spraying to actually apply herbicide to actually kill off any of the hardwoods, so that way only the pine would grow back. And if you notice, we got sweet gum out here, but if you look into that forest and look for any other hardwoods, there's nothing else out there. So I venture to guess that probably was the case over here. They were managing accordingly for that. And one of the things I would like to be able to see out here is some oaks, because oaks are fantastic for wildlife on so many levels. First off, if you're looking to support pollinators, they support over 700 species of pollinators, more than any other tree genus in the world. The next ones, of course, are prunus, salix, birches, betula. So right on down the line there. If you want to, support pollinators, then what you want to do is you want to plant trees and you want to plant oaks. So in this particular case, one of the things that I'm looking at is, again, I would kind of open this up, maybe get some trees planted in here in the way of some oaks. But the problem is the oaks that you plant today are going to need 30 years before they start producing acorns. So in the meantime, I just had a conversation with one of our Delmarva Woodland stewards, Jim Carsnitz. That's another program that I help to administer, about what you do in the interim. And you can actually bring in some shrubs. So like among other things, if you do a clear cut and you want to actually convert this over to a hardwood type of setting, then what you want to do is, you plant your oaks and the like, oaks, prunus, betula, maybe some gray birch in here. But what you wind up doing in the interim is you get some shrubs in here, because they're going to wind up producing quicker than the oaks will. And they're going to sustain that forest until the forest is able to crowd out and basically start growing on its own. So those are important points about that. So
Where are
American hazelnut immediately comes to mind because I know the nursery grows it.
Yeah.
But American plum is also something else that I'm thinking. Of course, what you want to do is you want to look at your soils, and what Alex had said about you want to take advantage of what's already growing here. So you have to look at your soils to be able to determine what the best thing is that you're going to be putting back here, and that's very critical to what your management goals are.
I know I said something earlier about this, but would it be okay to talk about programs? Okay, as John stated, okay, so let's do a different management scenario, and this is something that I've been involved in. Where are my NRCS guys? There's a program available through the NRCS called Wildlife Enhancement Planning. Okay, good. Oh, he's giving me the nod to talk about it. And basically, it's similar to a CREP program where they'll cost share you to come in and do supplemental wildlife plantings. As John stated, getting bushes in is important. I've written a couple plans for the wildlife enhancement planting where landowners have come to me and we've cut timber, and for one reason or one gentleman said, "Hey, I'm not getting the regeneration I want, but I found out about this program. Can you write a plan?" And basically I said, well, yeah, I can do this. And what we did was we went through and assessed what areas we were going to plant. We planted indigo, bush, and hazelnut because that's all we could get at the time. American plum was out, but we went around the field edges. He had us cut the field edges back when we cut the timber. So we went in and planted bush around the field edges where they get full sunlight. And then we went in and spot planted in the woods where we weren't getting any regeneration. So we had planted persimmon in the non-tidal forested wetlands. We planted white oak on the uplands. And then there were some areas that we just put back in loblolly pine. And then we put white pine in on the skid trails. The primary skid trails were 20 couple feet wide in the selection harvest. So we just carpeted that, and there was going to be heavy travel corridor for here. Basically, about the program though, it works as you basically have to plant a minimum of 2 shrub species and 5 timber species or 5 tree species, and it can be anything that's native to the state of Maryland. Unfortunately, you can't come in and plant like sawtooth oak or something. For you deer hunters that want acorns quick, sawtooth oak 5 to 7 years, it's not going to get cost shared because it's non-native, but they're cheap enough and they work. There's also another program the state of Maryland has just initiated called the 5 Million Trees program. That program is another planting program that is specifically geared towards afforestation. The wildlife enhancement planning can be done as a conversion or an afforestation program, but the 5 Million Trees program is specifically for afforestation. So let's say we had an acreage on this farm that we wanted to establish hardwood stand. Contact and Department of Natural Resources has hired specific plan managers and coordinators for this program. So you'd have to call your local, we have what's the breakdown on that?
So we have an upper floor manager. So we have a upper floor manager and a mid floor manager as of right now for the 5 program. They can contact us at the forestry office, I believe, in Denton, and be unclear about the upper floor. But
We had Haley has the upper shore, so she has Talbot. Didn't she have the upper 4 counties, and then they had a lower shore coordinator for. Yeah. So you got 2 coordinators, and he's out of the Wacomico office. Yeah, he's out of Salisbury.
Alex, can you talk about clear cuts versus, you mentioned select cuts? Can you define that for everybody who might not know what that is? The different types of cuts people might want to think about.
Okay, well, I went into talking specifically about clear cuts here because that's how the timber tells you how to manage it. I mean, I've been a forester for 25 years. I've been licensed for 21, and the timber will tell you how to manage it if you know how to read it. So I went through a clear cut scenario on this. Another type of management that's utilized in hardwood is what's called uneven aged management. So if you've ever been in a hardwood forest and you see some great big beautiful oak trees and some poplar with it, and and then you go 100 feet and you find there's nothing but pole-sized trees. Well, due to whatever disturbance, that's what's called an uneven aged forest. There may have been previous harvests taking place. There might have been a fire. There might have been wind damage. Well, anyway, it's disturbed so that you have trees that are 10 years old and you have trees that are 100 years old, all contained within the same forest. When we conduct selection harvests, we try and mimic that disturbance. We use what's called a single tree or a group tree selection method. And the type of method employed depends on the type of timber you have. So if you're in a mixed oak and poplar forest, and you have mature oak, you have mature poplar, you're going to want to take, if you have 4 or 5 poplar together and they're all mature, you're going to want to take all 4 or 5 of those to create a hole in the canopy so that you get full sunlight down to the floor to regenerate it. And what that'll do is it'll actually create a micro pocket where you can bed deer or turkey. Deer really love the low browse, really love poplar regeneration for browse, by the way, if you didn't know that. And then, another aspect would be like single tree selection, where you're going through and you're saying, okay, I've got a mature white oak. And then you look around and say, well, that tree is definitely mature. It's definitely ready to go. And you look around and you say, well, what's around it? And you say, okay, well, there's some smaller oaks around it. You take all the oaks? No, you take the dominant and you manage for the co-dominants around it. And then if there's any undesirable trees like these little sweet gums, you take those out as well, so that you're freeing up the crown on your crop trees, your mass producers, and giving them more space within the canopy to grow. And the best way to increase mass production with oaks is to increase the size of the canopy.
So among other things, among other things, nope.
Yes.
So among other things, you get the idea that managing a forest is a complex business. There's several different types of applications and prescriptions that can be applied to a forest stand to be able to manage for the purposes that the landowner wants to achieve. In this particular case, I just wanted to mention that when they were talking about property ownership before, this property is actually in the American Tree Farm system, whether or not anybody realizes that. So, and it's certified through 2025, I believe, when I checked the record on it. That's important because Tree Farm is actually at the pinnacle of forest management activities. So they actually raised the bar above and beyond the expectations of what most people would normally manage a forest for. And they're taking into consideration such things as making sure that you leave a buffer between here and a public roadway, so that way it does not look unsightly, among other things. But the important thing is that we're managing for the landowner's interest and the landowner's what the landowner has, different objectives, of course. But once again, if we're managing for wildlife, the key here is, so you have a situation here where you have beautiful timber, you want to go in and you can actually harvest, make some money on it, and then throw that money back into your management activities so that way you can increase and make it better for wildlife habitat. That's part of the concept and the idea. But again, as a tree farmer and in tree farm system, again, it's kind of a badge of honor that they will publicly display so that way they can let people know that this is a working family farm, if you will. Again, with the idea being that it's managed successfully for sustainable forestry, so that we will have this for generations to come.
We take a couple of questions and we'll wrap it up. So,
how does being in the critical zone, that zone of less
The
than,
Chesapeake Bay critical area.
yeah, how does that impact your management? The ability to cut.
Well, typically, what happens is the critical zone is an area that can be managed in, but usually any decisions, Stacy, if you want to jump in on here, because he's on the forestry board for Somerset County, it comes down to actually getting permission from the forestry board to make sure that the activities are going to be acceptable and that there's no basic alternatives to the management that can be done. In other words, we want to make sure that you're protecting the assets. And of course, you have a buffer in close to the water that has to absolutely be maintained, and is an area that you would do no management work in as far as that's concerned. Yeah, we want to add anything along with that, Stacy?
Well, I mean, the critical area, just for those that may or may not know, it's 1,000 feet the mean high water level of a tributary of the Chesapeake or coastal bay. So anything within that area would be in the critical area, and as a result, it would need to be screened by Maryland Department of Natural Resources, Wildlife and Heritage Service, and then they may put forth comments with respect to how it should be managed, and then you would take those comments and incorporate them into a critical area timber harvest plan, which would then need to be approved by your county forestry board, and then ultimately the county before any harvesting activity.
Thank you.
Another question? James has another one.
What do you do about managing for invasive trees such as autumn olive and tree of heaven, and invasive vines like Japanese honeysuckle and other topical ones?
So in the, I had a property on the lower shore that had over 1 acre of wisteria, Chinese wisteria. In a situation like that, and it was so bad, I had 24-inch diameter breast height loblolly pine trees, a little bit about that size, that were being girdled by the Chinese wisteria. Never saw such a thing, and I wish I had taken a picture of it. And it's so far away now, I probably won't be able to find it again. But anyway, the point is that the wisteria was actually taking over the entire forest and was overtopping a lot of the existing trees that were already out there. In a situation like that, you really don't have too much of a choice. You have to go in and clear cut and basically get it down on the ground so you can manage it, and then come back in and treat it with herbicides. But each invasive has its own method by which you want to be able to manage for. Believe it or not, I've successfully managed mature autumn olive by just cutting it down. You can contact me and I can make arrangements to let you purchase, but there's also resources available on the web for each specific species.